The white ravens were not sent to eat the dead. They were sent to find what death could not keep. That was the old saying before the palace turned it into a warning, and the warning into a punishment. By the time Tessira Lark was dragged into the winter kitchen yard with blood pails pressed into her shaking hands, no one called the ravens sacred anymore. They called them cursed. Lord Osric Bracken smiled, as if cruelty were only discipline wearing a cleaner coat. "Let the weak girl feed them," he said, loud enough for the servants' guards and lower courtiers to hear. "If she drops the pails, perhaps the birds will finally find something useful in her." Laughter moved through the yard. Not loud. Worse. Comfortable. Tessira kept both hands around the iron handles and lowered her eyes to the frost-black stones. The pails were too heavy. Everyone knew it. Fresh liver, cracked wolf bones, slaughterhouse scraps, and dark blood thickened by cold dragged her arms toward the ground until her wrists trembled. Her body always betrayed her first in the wrists. That was what the palace remembered. Not that she rose before dawn to scrub hearth ash from the royal ovens. Not that she remembered which guards took no onions in their broth, which old laundress needed softer bread, which kennel boy hid fever under jokes so he would not lose wages. Not that she never let a kitchen fire die even when winter wind crawled under the doors. They remembered the dropped cauldron, the fainting, the flour sack she had failed to lift, the way her breath sometimes caught after running stairs. A weak girl was easier to name than a tired one, easier still than a girl no one had cared to save. "Go on a guard," said, shoving the second pail harder against her hip. "The cursed things are hungry." Tessira lifted both. Pain burned up her palms. She did not answer. Words spent on cruel people became another meal. Across the yard, beyond the steam vents and frost-crusted wells, the dead wing rose against the northern wall of the palace. It had once been an aviary of prophecy, built of pale stone and moon glass, for kings who believed white ravens could find lost pieces of the soul. Now its arches were broken, its roof opened to gray winter sky. White feathers clung to the iron bars like scraps of old snow. The ravens waited inside, hundreds of them, pale as bone, silent as judgment. Their eyes were not black like common carrion birds. They were blue-white, sharp and cold, as if each one carried a splinter of moon under its skull. Tessira had never feared them. That was one more thing people used against her. Weak girl likes bone birds. Weak girl belongs where living wolves refuse to look. Weak girl has no beast, so she feeds beaks. She reached the dead wing gate with her shoulders aching. Behind her, the guard stopped 6 steps away because even men with swords feared the ravens after sunrise. The palace had many stories about them. They stole last warmth from bodies left too close to their nests. They pecked names from dead tongues. They cried before royal blood failed. But Tessira had once found a raven with a broken wing under the ash chute and wrapped it in her apron while everyone else called for a knife. The bird had not bitten her. It had pressed its cold beak to her thumb and watched her as if it were memorizing a road home. Since then, the white ravens never screamed when she passed. She nudged the gate open with her shoulder and stepped inside. The dead wing swallowed the yard noise at once. No laughter, no kitchen bells, only wings shifting above her and the faint drip of melting frost from broken stone. At the center of the aviary stood the old feeding slab, black from generations of blood. Tessira reached it on unsteady legs and set down the first pail. Her fingers had gone numb. She tried to lower the second more carefully, but a cramp seized her right hand. The iron handle slipped. Blood and scraps spilled across the slab, splashing her dress, her wrist, the frost-white stone. Outside the gate, the guard laughed. There she is. Tessira closed her eyes. For one breath, shame felt heavier than the pails. Then something soft touched her hand. She opened her eyes. A white raven stood on the feeding slab. It ignored the meat. It looked at the cut where the pail handle had split her palm. Another raven landed beside it. Then, another. The air filled with folding wings. Not frantic, not hungry, but orderly. The birds gathered around her blood, as if they had been waiting for the right bell to ring. The first raven dipped its head. Tessira braced for pain. None came. Its pale beak touched her blood with the gentleness of a key entering a lock. Cold traveled through her arm, then deeper, under skin, under bone, into a place she had never known, had a name. Something answered there. Not a wolf, not a howl. A thin white thread of recognition, older than her weakness, older than the kitchen, older than every pitying look that had taught her to make herself small. A woman's voice moved through her memory. Not command. Reminder. Keep what kings lose. The raven lifted its head. Its eyes burned brighter. All around the aviary, the white birds opened their wings. The spilled blood on the slab did not soak into stone. It drew itself into a narrow, shining line and ran toward the oldest arch of the dead wing, the one sealed with royal chains and black wax. Tessira stepped back. No servant was allowed near that arch. No priest blessed it. No palace wolf crossed its shadow. The ravens rose as one. They did not go to the meet. They flew straight toward the sealed arch. The royal chains snapped. The sound struck the northern palace like ice breaking over deep water. From the high windows came shouts. Guards ran across the yard. Somewhere inside the palace, a wolf began to howl, then stopped so suddenly the silence hurt. The arch burst open. Darkness breathed out. The ravens vanished into it. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then 7 white ravens returned. They flew low and slow, their wings bright against the dead stone. Each carried something glowing in its beak. At first, Tessira thought it was fire. Then the first raven dropped its burden onto the feeding slab. A shard of heart light struck the stone and pulsed, silver at the edges, dark red at the center. Alive. The second raven dropped another. Then the third. Then all 7. The fragments beat together, not as meat, not as magic, but as pieces of something torn from a royal wolf and hidden where no living hand was meant to find it. The guard fell to his knees outside the gate. Across the palace, every wolf began howling at once. Tessira stood among white wings, blood on her palm, heartlight at her feet. And in the highest royal window, Alpha King Tharen Vant appeared, one hand braced against the stone, his face stripped of all command. Behind him, his monstrous wolf shadow rose for the first time in years. Its chest was hollow, and the 7 heart fragments on the slab began beating toward him. The palace did not understand the sound of every wolf howling at once. It was not alarm. It was recognition. Tessira Lark stood inside the dead wing with blood drying across her palm and 7 fragments of a wolf heart beating on the feeding slab. Each pulse sent silver-red light across the frost-stained stone. Each beat answered the next uneven but alive, as if the pieces remembered a rhythm they had been forbidden to finish. The white ravens circled above her in silence. That frightened the guards more than screaming would have. Men poured into the yard with spears and moon-iron nets, but none crossed the gate. The first guard, who had laughed at Tessira, still knelt in the mud, staring at the heartlight, as if he had seen his own death written inside it. From the highest royal window, Alpha King Tharen Vant remained frozen. For one breath he looked less like a king than a man struck through a wound no one else could see. Then command returned to his face like armor being fastened over broken bone. "Clear the yard," he said. Even from the dead wing, Tessira heard him. The wolves stopped howling, all at once. The silence that followed bent every head. Tharen disappeared from the window. Moments later, the northern doors of the palace opened, and he stepped into the yard in black battle armor and a winter fur mantle, dark as storm cloud. He was taller than she remembered. Harder, too. His face had the stillness of carved stone, but his eyes were fixed on the feeding slab, not on Tessira. Behind him came Lord Osric Bracken. The royal uncle walked quickly, but not carelessly. His silver-brown hair was tied back with a black clasp, his council coat lined in wolf fur, his mouth already shaped for explanation. He saw the ravens, saw the heart fragments, saw Tessira standing beside them. His expression did not become afraid. It became useful. "Do not go closer," Majesty Osric said. "The birds have staged a corpse lure." Tharen did not stop. "Those are not corpse lights." Osric's gaze sharpened. "They are raven tricks." The 7 fragments pulsed harder at the sound of his voice. Tessira felt the beat in her cut palm. Not command. Pull. The white raven on the slab tilted its head toward her. Its pale beak clicked once gentle and precise, as if correcting a child at prayer. A memory rose in Tessira, without permission. An old woman's hands stained with flour and feather dust. A whisper near a dying hearth. "White ravens do not keep death, little lark. They keep the road back for what was stolen from the wolf." Tessira had been too young then to understand. Or perhaps someone had made sure she forgot. Osric pointed at her. "Seize the girl." 2 guards lifted their nets. The ravens dropped from the broken arches. Not attacking. Landing. One by one they settled on the gate, the wall, the frozen statues, the rusted chains, until the entire dead wing seemed lined with white witnesses. Their eyes burned blue-white. Their wings stayed folded. Their stillness said more than threat. The guards did not advance. Tharen's gaze moved at last from the heart fragments to Tessira. She lowered her head out of habit. "Look at me," he said. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Tessira raised her eyes. For the first time she saw the thing behind him clearly. His wolf shadow stood at his back, enormous and black. Its shoulders high, its muzzle long, its eyes bright as winter steel. But its chest was hollow, not wounded like flesh, empty as though some hand had reached into the beast years ago and removed the center that taught it how to feel. The 7 fragments beat faster. Tharen's face tightened. Pain passed through him so quickly, most would have missed it. Tessira did not. She knew the art of hiding weakness in public. She knew the tiny ways a body betrayed itself before pride could catch it. The king's fingers flexed once at his side. His breathing changed. His wolf shadow lowered its head toward the slab with an almost starving stillness. "You brought these?" Tharen asked. Tessira's throat dried. "No, Majesty." Osric moved beside him. "A lie. The birds answered her blood." "They answered the blood," Tessira said, before fear could silence her. "Not me." The yard went still. Osric's eyes narrowed. Tharen watched her. "Explain." She nearly laughed from terror. A kitchen girl explaining sacred birds to the Alpha King, while royal heartlight beat at her feet. But the raven nearest her hand clicked its beak again, and the old rule settled into her mind with terrible clarity. "They were not eating the pails," she said. "They ignored the meat. They touched my cut and went to the sealed arch." "Because you opened it," Osric said. "No." Tessira looked at the fragments. "Because something inside it belonged somewhere else." The 7 ravens on the slab bowed their heads. Tharen's wolf shadow shuddered. Osric stepped forward. "Majesty, this is exactly why the dead wing was sealed. The ravens steal royal remnants and use weak blood to carry them into court. Your father named them cursed for a reason." At the word father, the heart fragments pulsed once. Hard. Tharen's eyes darkened. Tessira saw Osric notice. She saw him regret saying too much. The king did not turn toward his uncle. "My father sealed the deadwing Osric's mouth, held calm by force, under priestly advice. After your first campaign sickness, I was never sick." "No," Osric said softly. "You were grieving." Something moved through Tharen's face. Not memory, the absence of it. That chilled Tessira more than anger would have. The king looked back at the heart fragments, and for one unguarded moment, his eyes looked lost. Not weak, robbed. The white raven on the slab lifted one glowing fragment in its beak. and hopped toward Tessira's bleeding hand. She stepped back. "No," she whispered. The bird stopped. Every raven in the dead wing turned its head toward her. Tharen saw it. So did Osric. Tessira swallowed. "I do not know what they want." Osric's voice was cold. "They want a keeper." The word struck the air like a hidden blade. Keeper. The ravens opened their wings. Tharen took one step closer to the gate. This time, the heart fragment in the raven's beak pulsed toward his hollow wolf shadow so violently the king's hand flew to his chest. For half a breath, his iron control broke. Tessira reached for the gate before she could think better of it. Majesty Osric seized her wrist through the bars. His fingers closed over the cut in her palm. Pain flashed white. The raven screamed. Not in hunger, in fury. The 7 heart fragments rose from the slab and hung in the air between Tessira and Tharen, beating harder, brighter, until their light revealed a thin black chain running from each fragment back through the sealed arch. The chains did not lead to death. They led under the palace. Tharen looked at the black links, then at Osric's hand around Tessira's bleeding wrist. His voice dropped to something colder than winter. "Release her." Osric did not move. The black chains tightened, and beneath the palace stones, something with a stolen heartbeat woke. The stones under the dead wing began to beat. Not loudly, worse than that. Quietly, steadily, like a heart trying not to be found. The black chains stretched from the 7 floating fragments into the sealed arch down through the broken floor and deeper beneath the palace. Each pulse pulled a faint red light through the links. Each pulse made Alpha King Tharen Vant's hollow wolf shadow shudder behind him. Lord Osric Bracken still held Tessira's wrist through the gate. His fingers pressed hard over the cut in her palm, not to stop the bleeding but to hide it. The ravens screamed until the air turned sharp. "Release her," Tharen said again. This time the words did not sound like royal command. They sounded personal. Osric looked at the king, then at the floating heart fragments, calculating how much of the yard had seen too much. Servants watched from behind the steam vents. Guards stood frozen with nets half raised. Palace wolves had gathered along the northern wall ears, flat throats trembling around, sounds they dared not release. Slowly, Osric opened his hand. Tessira pulled her wrist back against her chest. The skin where he had gripped her burned cold. One white raven dropped from the gate and landed near her feet. It did not touch her wound this time. It turned toward the sealed arch and gave a low clicking sound, almost like bone tapping glass. Tessira understood nothing, but her blood did. A thin ache moved from her palm into her chest. Not pain exactly, a direction. Like hearing someone call from a room she had passed all her life without noticing the door. Tharen's eyes fixed on her. What did he mean by keeper? Osric answered before she could. An old superstition. White Raven Keeper blood was used by dead priestesses to lure birds toward royal remains. The ravens went silent. Every white head turned toward him. Tessira felt the lie before she knew why. It was not in the words alone. It was in the way the heart fragments dimmed, as if insulted by being called remains. They are not remains, she said. Osric's gaze cut to her. Tessira should have stopped. A kitchen girl did not correct a royal uncle in front of the king, but one of the fragments pulsed toward Tharen's hollow wolf shadow, and the shadow beast lowered its head with such silent hunger that her fear shifted shape. It was still fear, but no longer only for herself. They are pieces, she said. Not dead. Tharen did not move. Something in his face tightened, as if the words had touched a locked place inside him. Osric's voice grew softer. Majesty grief makes servants poetic. Tessira looked at him then. Really looked. Not at the elegant coat, not at the fur lining, at the calm behind his eyes. He had known the ravens would answer her blood. He had wanted her sent here, but he had not expected the sealed arch to break in front of witnesses. That was why he had smiled when he gave the order. He had not been punishing weakness. He had been testing whether it still lived. Tharen stepped toward the gate. "Open it." The nearest guard fumbled with the lock. Osric raised a hand. "Majesty, the dead wing remains under royal quarantine. By whose order? Your father's?" "My father is dead. His protections are not." Tharen turned his head slowly. "Do you call this protection?" The 7 heart fragments pulsed again. Tharen's wolf shadow answered, with a sound like stone cracking in winter. For a moment, the king's hand lifted toward his own chest, not quite touching. The emptiness behind him seemed to pull at him from the inside. Tessira knew that look. Not royal pain. Missing pain. The kind a body carried when it had learned to live around what was gone. The gate opened. Tharen entered the dead wing. The ravens parted for him, but not with submission. They made a path. The way winter trees made a path for a storm unwilling to break, unable to stop it. His wolf shadow followed at his back, huge, and hollow its chest. A dark cave rimmed faintly in silver. Tessira stepped aside. Tharen stopped before the feeding slab. The 7 fragments hovered between them. Close enough now that Tessira could see each one was not the same. One held rage, one grief, one hunger, one tenderness so faint it made her throat ache. One looked almost black with buried memory. 2 beat weakly as if starved. Tharen reached toward the nearest. The raven struck the air at once. Not him. Between him and the fragment, their wings formed a white wall. Tharen's eyes hardened. "They deny me my own heart." Tessira felt the answer before the ravens gave it. "No," she whispered. "They deny the wound that took it." The white wall settled. Tharen looked at her, dangerous now. "You speak for them, I do not know how." "Yet you do," Tessira swallowed. "No, Majesty. I think they remember through me." Osric stood outside the gate, his face unreadable, too unreadable. The black chains pulled again, and the sealed arch beyond the feeding slab groaned wider. A stair descended from it, narrow and wet with red light. The heartbeat below grew stronger. A raven landed on Tessira's shoulder. Its claws did not hurt. Its beak brushed her ear cold as moonlit bone. This time the memory was clearer. An old woman with white feathers braided into her hair, hands pressing something small and warm into a child's palm. A warning whispered, while doors shook above them. "If the king's wolf is ever broken, do not give the pieces to the hand that broke him." Tessira went cold. Tharen saw the change. "What did you remember?" Osric answered from the gate. "Enough." He drew a black whistle from beneath his coat and blew. No sound came for human ears. The ravens reacted as if struck. White bodies slammed against the broken arches. Several fell. The bird on Tessira's shoulder gave a sharp cry and dropped to the stone. Tessira caught it before it hit the ground. Tharen's wolf shadow lunged toward Osric. The black chains snapped tight. All 7 heart fragments jerked backward toward the stair, beneath the sealed arch, dragging their light away from Tharen. Osric lowered the whistle. "The birds are cursed, Majesty," he said, voice calm again. "And now the girl has proven she carries their sickness." Tessira knelt with the stunned raven in her hands. Its white chest fluttered weakly. Her cut palm touched its feathers. The bird's eyes opened. Blue-white light flooded them. All 7 heart fragments stopped pulling away. Then every raven in the dead wing turned toward Tessira Lark and bowed its head. Outside the gate, Lord Osric Bracken's calm finally broke. "Kill the bird," he ordered, and the heart fragment closest to Tharen began to bleed. The guard nearest the gate lifted his spear. Tessira Lark felt the white raven shudder in her hands. It weighed almost nothing. That frightened her more than if it had struggled. A creature that had crossed sealed royal chains and carried back a piece of an Alpha King's wolf heart should not feel so fragile against her palms. "Do it," Lord Osric Bracken said. The guard stepped into the dead wing. Alpha King Tharen Vant moved before the spear could lower. He did not draw his sword. He did not shout. He simply turned his head, and the whole yard seemed to remember what kind of man ruled it. No one touches the bird. The guard froze. Osric's eyes narrowed. Majesty White Raven sickness spreads through blood contact. The girl has already been marked. Tessira looked down at her cut palm pressed to the raven's feathers. Marked. That word made every servant in the yard step back from her, as if weakness had become contagion. Tharen noticed. His expression remained hard, but his gaze moved once across the servants, the guards, the pails, the ruined slab, and finally, Tessira kneeling with blood on her dress. He was not a gentleman. Nothing in him offered comfort easily. Yet his silence changed shape no longer, the indifference of a king above kitchen punishments. It became attention, dangerous attention. Osric saw it too. She should be removed. Why? Tharen asked. Because the ravens bowed. The stunned bird in Tessira's hands opened one blue-white eye. Tharen looked at it. That is not an answer. It is the only answer needed. No, Tharen said. It is the one you hope I will accept. The yard went cold. Tessira held her breath. No one spoke to Osric Bracken that way. Not even nobles who hated him. He had been the king's advisor since the old court burned. He had raised half the palace laws, signed half the hunt treaties, buried half the royal scandals beneath calm phrases and sealed doors. Osric lowered the black whistle slowly. You are not yourself, Majesty. Something ugly passed through Tharen's face. Not anger, weariness, as if he had heard that sentence too many times whenever some lost part of him tried to wake. The bleeding heart fragment near the feeding slab pulsed again. A thin thread of dark red light slid from it toward the stair beyond the broken arch. Another black chain tightened underneath the stone. Tessira felt it in her palm. The raven's weak heartbeat. The fragment's broken beat. The hollow place in Tharen's wolf shadow. They were not separate sounds. They were pieces of one rhythm being kept apart. She whispered. The chain is hurting it. Osric snapped his gaze to her. Silence. Tessira flinched. The old obedience returned so quickly she hated herself for it. Kitchen girls survived by becoming quiet before power asked twice. But the raven in her hands pressed its beak to her thumb. Not command. Reminder. Her blood warmed beneath its touch. Images flickered through her mind. White ravens flying through storm-dark towers. Not eating dead flesh. Not calling ghosts, but pulling silver-red shards from locked places where wolves had been stripped of what made them whole. Keeper hands lifting not to rule the birds, but to show them whose loss still had a road home. Tessira's breath shook. They are not cursed, she said. Osric's face hardened. Tharen did not look away from her. Then what are they? The answer came slowly. Not learned, but remembered. They recover what was cut from royal wolves. Tessira looked at the 7 fragments, but only when keeper blood shows them where the pieces belong. A white raven on the gate spread its wings. Then another. Then every raven in the dead wing lifted its wings without taking flight, making the broken aviary shine like a field of snow under moonlight. Tharen's wolf shadow stepped forward. The hollow in its chest opened wider. The king's jaw clenched as if he felt the emptiness tear. Osric moved closer to him. Majesty, listen to me. If even one fragment returns incorrectly, your wolf could wake rabid. You would tear through this court before sunset. Tessira expected Tharen to deny it. He did not. That frightened her more than Osric's warning. Tharen looked at his own wolf shadow, as if it were both weapon and wound. Is that why you buried them? Osric's answer came too smoothly. I buried nothing. I preserved what war broke. The heart fragments dimmed. Lie. Tessira knew it. At the same moment, the ravens did. The bird in her hands suddenly stood, though its body still trembled. It climbed from her palms to her wrist, leaving one white feather stuck to the blood there. The feather did not fall. It sank into the cut like light into water. Tessira gasped. A pale mark bloomed under her skin, not a wolf mark, not a noble crest, but the shape of a raven wing, curved around a tiny shard of heart. The yard recoiled. Osric whispered, "Keep her blood." Tharen heard him. "So you knew what she was." Osric's mouth closed. Too late. The 7 heart fragments rose from the slab again. They did not fly to Tharen. They hovered around Tessira, each, still chained to the dark below, each beating toward the hollow wolf shadow at the king's back. Tessira swayed. The light was too much. The cold was too much. Her body, unreliable and hated, trembled under a force no one had taught it how to carry. Tharen stepped toward her. Osric seized his arm. Do not let pity dress itself as instinct. Tharen looked down at his uncle's hand. The yard stopped breathing. "Remove your hand." Osric released him. Tharen crossed the feeding yard and entered the ring of hovering fragments. The ravens did not stop him this time, but they watched every breath he took. He knelt before Tessira, not like a subject, not like a lover, but like a man approaching a blade that might either save or ruin him. "Can you return them?" he asked. Tessira looked at the hollow in his wolf shadow. Then, at the chains pulling the fragments toward the stair. "No," she said honestly. "Not while something below is still holding them." A faint flicker crossed his face. Disappointment buried fast. Respect slower to hide. "Then we go below," he said. Osric's voice cut across the yard. "If she crosses that arch with royal heart fragments, she becomes a soul thief under palace law." The ravens screamed. Tharen rose. "Then I will witness her passage." Osric's expression turned cold and final. "You cannot witness what your wolf is missing, Majesty." The black chains tightened all at once. The 7 fragments jerked toward the broken arch. Tessira cried out as the raven mark in her palm burned. From beneath the palace came a deep, wet beat. Once. Twice. Then a door opened under the dead wing, and the darkness below breathed out Tharen's name. The door beneath the dead wing did not lead into a tunnel. It led into a heartbeat. Tessira Lark felt it before she saw the stair, a deep pulse moving through the stone, slow and wet, as if the palace had hidden a living thing under its northern bones. The 7 fragments strained toward the opening, their black chains drawn tight. White ravens lined the broken arch above her wings, half-spread eyes burning with cold blue fire. Tharen Vant stood beside her, not close enough to touch, close enough for every guard servant and noble watching from the yard to understand that if the darkness below swallowed her, the king would not pretend he had not seen. Lord Osric Bracken remained near the gate, his face carved into calm again. "Majesty, you cannot enter that vault with a raven-marked girl." Tharen did not look at him. "You have said many things I cannot do, and I have kept you alive through most of them." The king's jaw tightened. That sentence struck something deeper than insult. Tessira saw it in the way his wolf shadow shifted behind him, hollow chest opening wider, as if the beast remembered being saved and hated the shape of the saving. Tessira held the stunned white raven against her chest. It had recovered enough to grip her sleeve, but its feathers still trembled from Osric's whistle. The mark in her palm burned around the white feather. A pale wing curled around a tiny shard of heart. She looked down the stair. "I should go first," she said. Tharen's eyes cut to her. "No." The answer came too quickly, too personally. Then his face hardened as if he had heard the same thing she had. He had not meant to sound afraid for her. Tessira lowered her gaze. "The fragments are pulling toward me and away from you. If you go first, whatever holds them may tighten. You expect me to send you into a sealed vault under my palace because your blood aches. No, Majesty." Her fingers tightened around the raven. "I expect you to know. I have spent my life being sent places stronger. People did not want to go." Something moved in his expression. Not pity. recognition and the anger that followed it. Osric spoke from behind them. She admits it herself. Servants go where they are sent. Tessira turned. For once her voice did not vanish. I was sent to feed birds you hoped would expose me. The yard fell still. Osric's eyes cooled. Tharen looked at his uncle. Is that true? Osric's answer came after the smallest pause. I suspected old blood in the kitchens. I needed certainty before it endangered you. By using her as bait, by testing a threat before it reached your bedchamber, the ravens rustled. Tessira felt the word threat move through her like winter water. It should have frightened her. It did. But fear had changed since the first raven touched her blood. It was no longer a wall. It was a door she could see through. She stepped onto the stair. The 7 heart fragments followed. Tharen followed 1 pace behind. Osric cursed softly and came after them with 6 guards. The stair descended through stone older than the palace above. White feathers lay trapped in cracks. Black chains ran along the walls like frozen veins, each link pulsing when a fragment passed. Tessira's breath misted in front of her. The raven on her sleeve tucked its head beneath its wing but did not leave. At the bottom stood a circular vault. The heart vault was not filled with treasure. It was filled with cages. 7 black iron cages hung from the ceiling over a pit of dark water. Each cage was shaped like a rib. Each one held a hollow where something had once pulsed. The black chains from the fragments led to those cages, then deeper into the water below. On the far wall, painted in faded silver, was an old raven law. White wings return. What claws can it hold? Tessira read it silently. Then the letters shifted. Return only to the living who can bear it. Tharen stopped beside her. His wolf shadow entered the vault and nearly collapsed. The hollow in its chest pulled toward the cages with such force that the beast's front legs buckled. Tharen's hand flew to his own breastplate. His breath broke once sharp and unwilling. Tessira reached toward him, then stopped herself. He was a king. She was a kitchen girl. And yet the distance between them felt crueler than the law. Do not look at me like that, he said. She froze. Like what? As if you can see what is missing. Tessira swallowed. I can. The honesty hurt them both. Osric descended into the vault behind them. Then you understand why it was done. The 7 fragments darkened. Tharen turned slowly. Speak carefully. I have spoken carefully for years, Osric said. Care did not make the truth kinder. Your wolf heart did not shatter in one blow. It broke each time grief tried to rule you. After the Eastern massacre, after your first Luna candidate poisoned herself, rather than be used by rival packs. After your mother died, naming enemies, you still wished to forgive. Tessira saw Tharen's face close. Not because he remembered, because he did not. That was the horror. Osric had named wounds, and the king stood before them like a man hearing stories from a stranger's grave. Tessira looked at the nearest fragment. Its light trembled, with a tenderness so faint it seemed ashamed to exist. That one, she whispered. What is it? Osric's mouth tightened. The fragment answered before he could, not with words, with a memory in light. A younger Tharen stood in a rain-soaked kennel, kneeling beside a wounded palace wolf everyone else had left to die, because the beast could no longer hunt. He had removed his cloak and laid it over the animal's shaking body. His hand rested against its muzzle, gentle grief, struck furious at helplessness. The image vanished. The fragment beat harder. Tharen stared at the empty air. His voice came rough. I do not remember that. No, Osric said. You remember command. I left you that. Tharen turned on him. The guard stepped back. Osric did not. A whole wolf heart would have made you vulnerable, he said. Mercy can be used. Grief can be used. Love, most of all. I cut away what rival courts could use to lead your beast by the throat. Tessira felt sick. You did not preserve him, she said. You hollowed him. Osric looked at her as if she were an insect speaking law. I made him a king. The white raven on Tessira's sleeve lifted its head and cried once. The 7 fragments broke their chains at the same time. For one glorious breath, they flew toward Tharen's wolf shadow. Then the pit below opened. A black hook shot up from the water and caught the tender fragment mid-air. Tharen's wolf shadow roared. Tessira ran forward without thinking, reaching for the captured light. Osric shouted, "Stop her!" The black hook snapped around her wrist. Pain locked through her bones. The vault water rose glossy and dark, carrying a shape beneath its surface. A great submerged wolf heart, bound in chains, beating slowly in the deep. Not a fragment. The center. Tessira stared down into the black water, and from inside the drowned heart, something whispered her name. The black hook around Tessira's wrist tightened. It was not iron. Iron would have been kinder. This thing was made of drowned, root-old spellbone and grief left too long without light. It bit into her skin without cutting at first, then began to pull slowly, steadily dragging her toward the rising vault water, where the great submerged wolf heart beat beneath the surface. Tessira dug her heels against the stone. Her body failed her almost at once. The weakness that had made the kitchen laugh at her returned with humiliating speed. Her legs shook. Her breath tore thin. The raven on her shoulder screamed and beat its wings, but the hook only pulled harder, as if the vault had no interest in her strength, only her blood. Tharen Vant moved toward her. Lord Osric Bracken shouted, "Touch her, and the heart will take you both." Tharen did not stop. The 7 freed fragments spun wildly between him and the pit, their lights flickering as the black water climbed higher. His hollow wolf shadow lunged beside him, jaws wide, but the submerged heart below answered with one deep beat. The beast staggered. Tharen's hand struck his chest. Pain bent him for half a breath. Tessira saw the cost, and hated herself for seeing it. A king should not look breakable. A kitchen girl should not be close enough to know where the break was. "Do not!" she gasped. Tharen's eyes snapped to hers. She did not know whether she meant, "Do not save me," or "Do not break yourself for me." Perhaps both. Osric descended the last step into the vault, his face no longer calm. This is why the dead wing was sealed. Keeper blood does not heal gently. It drags lost pieces through living flesh. Let the hook take her, and the fragments will settle again. Tharen's voice dropped. Settle where Osric said nothing. The black water answered for him, rising around the cages, shaped like ribs. Tessira looked down. The drowned heart beneath the surface was enormous, bound in 7 thick chains that ran into the dark stone walls. It did not look dead. It looked imprisoned. Its outer edges were blackened, but within the chains, silver-red light still pushed weakly against the water. Again, from inside it, the whisper came. Not loud, not spoken with a mouth. "Keeper?" The word moved through Tessira's blood. She trembled. I do not know how. The heart beat once. The 7 fragments paused. The white ravens along the vault walls lowered their heads, listening. A memory unfolded across the water. Not a full scene. A feeling with images around it. Tharen younger standing in rain beside a dying palace wolf. His cloak over the animal, his bare hand against its muzzle. No audience, no command. Only a young king refusing to walk away from a creature that could no longer serve him. The tender fragment glowed. Osric's expression turned sharp. "Do not name it." Tessira understood then. The ravens had not returned random shards. They had brought back pieces that still knew what they were. She looked at the fragment caught by the black hook above the pit. Its light was soft, almost ashamed. Nothing like royal power. No battlefield rage. No dominance. No command. "Mercy," she whispered. The fragment flared white. Tharen inhaled as if the word had entered his ribs. Osric struck her across the face. The blow was not hard enough to break bone, but her body was already strained past its limit. She fell to one knee, the hook dragging her closer to the pit. Blood filled her mouth. The white raven on her shoulder launched itself at Osric's face, but he knocked it aside with a black whistle. Tharen's sword came free. The sound of steel filled the vault. Every guard backed away. Osric froze with the whistle still in his hand. "Raise that again," Tharen said, "and I will remove the hand holding it." His voice was cold enough to make even the ravens still, but the tender fragment pulsed between them and Tessira saw the terrible truth Tharen could threaten. He could command. He could kill. Those parts of him remained untouched, because Osric had found them useful. It was mercy he had buried. Mercy, grief, tenderness, memory, anything that might make the king hesitate before becoming a weapon. Tessira forced herself upright. The hook tore a cry from her throat. Tharen stepped toward her again. "No," she said, stronger this time. He stopped, fury flashing across his face, because obedience did not come easily to him, least of all when someone weaker stood in danger. She looked at him through pain. "You have to take it." His gaze moved to the fragment. Osric laughed once. "He cannot. That is the point. His wolf learned to live without it." The hollow wolf shadow snarled. Tessira shook her head. Living without something is not the same as surviving whole. The words seemed to strike Tharen harder than the pain in his chest. The hook yanked again. Her knees nearly failed. Tharen looked at the fragment, and for the first time since entering the vault, fear showed plainly in his eyes. Not fear of battle, not fear of death, fear of feeling what had been removed. Tessira understood that fear. Her whole life people had told her weakness was shame. But weakness had also been the place where she noticed things others crushed under strength. The old laundress hiding pain, the kennel boy with fever, the wounded raven under the ash chute. Maybe mercy hurt because it refused to let suffering become ordinary. Tharen lifted his hand. The tender fragment trembled toward him. Osric whispered, "Majesty, if you take that back, every grief I spared you will return with it." Tharen's face went still. Then he said, "Then let it hurt." The fragment flew into his wolf shadow. The beast arched as if pierced by moonfire. Tharen staggered one hand, braced against the stone wall, and a sound broke from him that no court had ever heard. Not weakness, not madness. Grief. The hollow in the wolf shadow's chest filled with one small silver-red light. The black hook around Tessira's wrist cracked, not enough to free her. Enough for her to breathe. White ravens erupted through the vault, circling Tharen and Tessira in a storm of pale wings. The drowned heart below beat harder, answering the returned fragment. Osric stared at the light in the wolf shadow's chest, with hatred that looked almost like fear. "You think mercy makes him yours," he said to Tessira. She wiped blood from her mouth. "No." The raven she had saved limped back to her side and pressed its head against her ankle. "It makes him his." The vault went silent. Then the black water beneath the pit split open, revealing 6 deeper chains and 6 darker cages below the first. Osric lifted the whistle to his lips again. This time he did not aim it at the ravens. He aimed it at Tharen's newly returned heart fragment, and blew. No human ear heard the whistle. The heart fragment did. The small silver-red light inside Tharen Vant's wolf shadow flickered as if a blade had passed through flame. The wolf lurched, jaws snapping open, and Tharen staggered with it, one hand clamped over his chest. The sound that broke from him was not grief this time. It was hunger sharpened by pain. The ravens scattered against the vault walls. Tessira Lark tried to rise, but the black hook still held her wrist. It dragged her 1 more inch toward the pit, where the drowned heart beat harder beneath the water. 6 deeper chains glowed below the surface, waiting like roots wrapped around something that had learned to suffer in silence. Osric lowered the whistle with shaking calm. "There," he said, "that is mercy returned without discipline. It makes him unstable." Tharen's wolf shadow turned toward him. The one small light in its hollow chest flared wildly. Mercy, torn awake, and attacked before it could settle, burned like a wound. The wolf wanted to protect, to punish, to tear away every hand that had ever touched its heart. Tharen fought it. Tessira saw the fight in his body, shoulders locked, breath-ragged sword arm trembling with restraint. He could kill Osric before any guard moved. Part of him wanted to. The fragment wanted justice fast enough to become bloodshed. Osric watched the king struggle and spoke to the guards without looking away. You see, I did not hollow him for ambition. I hollowed him because a whole king can be led by pain. The words reached the men at the stair. Fear did the rest. 2 guards lifted their spears toward Tessira. Tharen's head turned. The vault temperature dropped. Point those at her again, he said, voice almost unrecognizable, and I will forget your names before I end you. The guards froze. Osric's mouth tightened. Mercy is already becoming possession. Tessira tasted blood and understood the trap. If Tharen protected her too fiercely, Osric would call the returned heart fragment corruption. If he killed, the uncle would claim every theft had been necessary. If Tessira begged him to stop, she would look like the keeper who controlled him. She looked at the raven beside her ankle. Its wing dragged slightly where Osric had struck it, but its blue-white eyes stayed clear. It clicked its beak once, not at Tharen, at the fragment. Tessira remembered the old woman's whisper, keep what kings lose. Not take, not wield, keep. Her palm burned around the raven mark. She pressed her free hand to the stone floor and forced herself to breathe through the hook's pull. Mercy, she said. The fragment flickered. Osric snapped. Do not answer her. She is not speaking to you, Tharen said. The danger in his voice made the ravens shiver. Tessira looked at him. Not you either, Majesty. That stopped him. Just enough. She turned her attention back to the fragment glowing in his wolf shadow's chest. Mercy is not rage. It is not ownership. It is not the hand that strikes because pain has been remembered. The silver-red light steadied for one beat, then another. Tharen's breath changed. He looked at Tessira, as if she had placed her palm against the part of him no one had ever been allowed to touch and not press down. Osric's face darkened. Keeper blood, charms, royal beasts. No, Tessira whispered. It reminds stolen pieces what they are. The ravens answered without sound. Hundreds of pale wings folded close against the vault walls. The black hook around Tessira's wrist cracked again. A thin line of blood ran down her palm and touched the stone. The water in the pit rippled, revealing the deeper cages more clearly now. 6 fragments still remained below, one blazing with fury, one blackened with grief, one dim with memory, one silver and frightened, one red as loyalty, and one so dark Tessira could barely look at it. At the center, the drowned wolf heart pulsed once. The vault whispered, name them right or return them wrong. Tessira's stomach clenched. She was not strong enough for this. The thought came sharp and familiar, carrying every laugh from the kitchen yard, every dropped pail, every hand that had shoved work into her arms and called her failure when her body broke under it. Then the wounded raven pressed its head to her ankle. Weak did not mean empty. Tharen took one step toward her. Tell me what to do. The words stunned the vault into silence. Osric looked horrified, not because the king had obeyed, but because he had asked. Tessira shook her head. I cannot carry your heart for you. I know. You cannot take every piece at once. I know. She was not sure he did. Not truly. Men like Tharen were trained to endure by swallowing the whole blade, but this wound had been made from pieces. It would have to return piece by piece, named and chosen. Tessira looked toward the pit. Then do not reach for the next one until you know what the first has cost. Tharen's jaw tightened. A lesser man might have called that insult. He nodded once, Osric exhaled through his nose, disgusted. A kitchen girl now instructs the throne. Tharen turned slightly. A kitchen girl noticed what my counsel buried. The words struck harder than praise. Tessira had to look away before they entered too deeply. Osric lifted the whistle again. This time, the ravens moved first. They did not attack him. They flew between the whistle and Tharen's wolf shadow, forming a white shield of wings. Osric blew, but the sound shattered against the flock and scattered into harmless frost. His composure finally broke. "Ungrateful beasts," he hissed. The oldest raven, larger than the others, landed on the edge of the pit. Its feathers were white, but its beak was scarred black from old magic. It opened its wings toward Tessira and bowed. The vault wall behind it cracked. A hidden niche opened, revealing a row of small bone whistles hanging on black cord. Not one. Dozens. Each carved from raven bone. Tessira went cold. Tharen saw them. So did the guards. Osric said nothing. He did not need to. The ravens had not been cursed into madness. They had been tortured into silence whenever they tried to return what was stolen. Tharen's wolf shadow rose to its full height. The mercy fragment in its chest glowed steady now. No longer wild. No longer weak. Osric Tharen said softly. His uncle stepped back. The black water in the pit surged upward before Tharen could move. A deeper chain snapped around the next fragment, the one blazing with fury, and dragged it toward the surface. Osric smiled through fear. "You wanted him whole," he said to Tessira. "Then let us see if you survive his rage." The fury fragment burst from the water like a burning red moon, and every raven in the vault screamed. The fury fragment did not glow like the others. It burned. Red light tore out of the black water and struck the vault ceiling hard enough to shake dust from the stone ribs above. The chained cages swung wildly. White ravens scattered in a storm of wings, not fleeing Tessira Lark, not fleeing Tharen Vant, but fleeing the heat of a peace returned too violently to the air. The fragment hovered over the pit, round and bright as a blood moon. Tharen's wolf shadow lunged toward it. This time Tessira felt the pull before he moved. It was not hunger like before. It was recognition sharpened into violence. Mercy had returned soft and wounded. Fury came back teeth first, and the hollow wolf at Tharen's back answered as if every buried insult, every stolen memory, every chain around its heart had become one command. Destroy. Tharen caught himself against a stone pillar. His claws came out. Not fully. Not in a complete shift. But enough for black nails to tear through his gloves and scrape sparks from the wall. Osric Bracken's smile widened. "There," he whispered. "That is the heart you think should be restored." Tessira dragged against the cracked hook on her wrist, trying to stand. Her legs shook so badly she almost fell. The wounded raven beside her beat one damaged wing and moved closer as if its small body could brace her against what was coming. Tharen's gaze fixed on Osric. The mercy fragment in his wolf shadow's chest flickered, nearly swallowed by the red light above the pit. "Run," Tharen said. Tessira looked at him. His voice was not cold now. It was strained, torn thin over something monstrous waking under his skin. "Run from me." The words should have terrified her. They did. But the terror was not simple. Under it, she heard the part of him still fighting to warn the weakest person in the room before his rage found a target. A hollow beast would not have warned her. A weapon would not have cared who stood too close. Osric lifted one hand toward the guards. "Hold position. Let the king show her what she has called back." The guards did not want to obey. Fear had turned their faces gray. But fear of Osric and fear of the king left them frozen in place, spears shaking in their hands. The fury fragment dropped lower. Tharen's wolf shadow rose higher, no longer hollow enough to look starved, but wrong in another way. Too large, too raw. A beast built from pain before memory could soften it. Tessira pressed her free hand over the raven mark in her palm. The mark burned. Not command. Road. She understood that now. Keeper blood did not tame ravens. It did not tame kings. It only marked the path stolen things could follow home if they were named correctly. So she looked at the red fragment and forced her voice above the pounding water. Fury. The fragment flared. Tharen snarled and bent forward as if the name had struck him. Osric laughed. Good. Name the beast. Make him worse. Tessira shook her head, though her whole body trembled. Fury is not cruelty. The fragment pulsed once. The ravens quieted. Fury is not slaughter, she said. It is the part that knows something sacred was touched without consent. Tharen's breath hitched. His wolf shadow stopped advancing. Only for a heartbeat. Enough. Tessira looked at him. Do you remember what it guarded? His eyes flashed red, then silver, then neither. The fury fragment opened, like an ember splitting. A memory burst across the vault wall. Tharen Younger standing in a corridor of the old East Tower. His armor was half-fastened. Blood ran from his temple. In front of him, a servant woman clutched a wounded, child-sized wolf pup. No, not a child. Tessira realized with relief. A young palace, wolf, small but not human, while armed nobles shouted that the beast had bitten a lord and must be put down. The wolf pup was terrified, shaking, cornered after being kicked. Young Tharen had stepped between them. No speech, no politics, only rage. Not because his pride was wounded, because the powerless creature in front of him could not survive the room without it. The memory shifted. Osric entered. Calm, gentle, a hand on Tharen's shoulder. Words too low to hear. Then darkness, a silver knife. A red fragment pulled from the wolf shadow's chest while Tharen stood dazed grief and anger draining from his face at once. The memory shattered. Tharen stared at the empty wall. His voice came out rough. You took it because I defended something weak. Osric's jaw tightened. I took it because you nearly killed 3 allied nobles over a kennel beast. You mean I frightened them? You endangered a treaty. I protected what they hurt. You protected instinct over rule. Tharen's wolf shadow growled, but the sound no longer filled the vault blindly. It had a shape now. A reason. Tessira saw the fury fragment's light pull toward the mercy already in the wolf's chest. Mercy and fury. Not enemies. Twin wounds. One knew suffering mattered. The other refused to let it be ignored. Tessira looked at Tharen. Can you take it back without using it on him? Osric's face sharpened. Do not ask him that. Tharen slowly turned his head toward her. The question hurt him. She saw that. It would have been easier to command, easier to promise, easier to rage. Instead, she had asked him for restraint. At the exact moment, rage had a right to exist. His claws scraped back against stone. One by one, they withdrew. I do not know, he said. The honesty moved through the vault like a different kind of power. Tessira nodded once. Then, do not take it as punishment. The fury fragment trembled. Take it as guard. Tharen closed his eyes. For the first time, he did not reach like a starving man. He opened his hand and waited. The red fragment flew into his wolf shadow. The beast arched but did not attack. Tharen dropped to one knee, one hand pressed to the floor, his breath coming in rough, broken pulls. The red light settled beside the silver mercy fragment in the hollow of the wolf's chest. The 2 lights beat unevenly, then found one shared rhythm. The black hook around Tessira's wrist snapped. She fell backward free. The wounded raven climbed into her lap and pressed its head against her torn sleeve. For a moment, no one moved. Then Tharen lifted his head. His eyes were wet. Not with softness, with returned pain. Osric stared at him as if the sight offended him more than any threat. You will regret this when the court uses your heart against you. Tharen stood slowly. No, you regret that I can feel what you did. The guards lowered their spears. All but one. The youngest guard near Osric still held his weapon high, trembling, waiting for the uncle's command. Osric saw it too. He turned, seized the spear from the guard's hand, and drove its moon-iron point into the black water. Then, let memory return before he is ready. The vault screamed. The dark fragment below the one Tessira had barely been able to look at rose from the drowned heart like a piece of night torn loose. Not grief, not fury, not mercy. Something older and colder. The raven struck the walls in panic. Mere thin black light spread across the water, and every torch in the vault died. Tharen's wolf shadow stepped back. For the first time, the king looked afraid. Osric whispered into the dark, "Let him remember the night he killed his own wolf heart," and the final black fragment opened its eye. The vault lost all color. Not darkness, exactly. Colorless cold. The black fragment hovered above the pit, open-eyed and silent, and every torch along the stone ribs died as if flame itself had remembered fear. White ravens clung to the walls. None flew now. None cried. Their feathers looked gray in the dead light, their blue-white eyes dimmed to narrow stars. Tessira Lark sat on the wet stone, with the wounded raven pressed against her lap, and felt the mark in her palm go cold. That frightened her more than the dark. Mercy had answered when named. Fury had answered when understood. This thing did not answer. It watched. Tharen Vant stood between Tessira and the pit, his wolf shadow at his back with 2 fragments burning in its chest, silver mercy red fury. They beat together uneven, but alive. Yet the black fragment made both lights shrink. Lord Osric Bracken stood near the water, one hand still gripping the stolen spear he had driven into the pit. His face was pale with strain, but his eyes burned. "Look at it, Majesty," he said. "Do not let the kitchen girl soften this one with pretty names." Tharen did not move. The black fragment opened wider. A memory spilled across the vault. Not on the wall. Everywhere. Tessira smelled smoke first, then wet fur, then royal blood. Tharen stood younger in a chamber lit by storm, his hands covered in dark red, his armor torn open at the chest. His wolf shadow thrashed behind him, monstrous wounded, half mad with grief. Bodies lay on the floor around him, not children, not servants, but armored men in royal colors, men who had come too close during some terrible night and paid for it. In the memory, young Tharen stared at his own wolf shadow in horror. "What did I do?" he whispered. Osric appeared beside him, younger and sorrowful, his hands raised carefully as if approaching a dangerous animal. "You loved too deeply the memory," Osric said. "You grieved too fiercely. Your wolf could not survive your heart." Tharen shook his head. "No, it killed what tried to comfort you." The wolf shadow tore at its own chest in the memory claws ripping through smoke and silver. A bright red core cracked inside it. Tharen screamed and reached for the beast, but the scene warped. The memory showed his hands covered in light, showed him pulling, showed the wolf heart breaking apart under his fingers. Then Osric's voice, soft as mercy, turned poisonous. "You begged me to make sure it never happened again." The memory snapped shut. The vault breathed once. Tharen staggered. Tessira saw his face and knew the fragment had found the wound it wanted. Mercy and fury were painful, but they had shape. This was worse. This was not a feeling. It was a verdict. I am the danger. I must be hollow. The black fragment drifted toward his wolf shadow. Osric lowered the spear. "Let him remember. This is the piece I buried deepest, because it was the only truth he could not survive." Tessira's fingers curled around the wounded raven. The mark in her palm remained cold. Keeper blood shows the road home. But this road led nowhere. The ravens had not bowed. That was the first wrongness. When mercy returned, they had settled. When fury rose, they had screamed but not refused. Now they clung to stone, as if the black fragment were not lost kin, but a predator wearing kin's skin. Tessira whispered, "No." Osric turned toward her. "No." Her voice shook. "That is not his heart." The black fragment's eye fixed on her. Pain stabbed through her palm. Tharen looked at her barely. He seemed far away now, dragged into the memory's old chamber. Tessira. Her name in his mouth sounded like a hand reaching from underwater. She crawled to her knees. Her body protested at once. Her wrist throbbed where the hook had held her. Blood had dried on her face from Osric's blow. Her legs trembled so badly she had to brace one hand on the floor. Weak. The word rose from every old corner of her life. Weak girls dropped pails. Weak girls were bait. Weak girls should not stand between kings and monsters, made from memory. The wounded raven climbed onto her forearm and pressed its beak to the cold mark in her palm. Warmth flickered. Not much. Enough. Tessira looked at the black fragment. A heart piece remembers what it was. The fragment pulsed. Wrong. A stolen piece reaches for home. The black eye narrowed. Wrong. This does not reach, she said. It accuses. Osric's mouth tightened. Tessira understood then. Not fully. Enough. This is not guilt, she said. Guilt can teach. Guilt can grieve. Guilt can ask forgiveness. The black fragment shook. The water below began to churn. This is blame. The ravens lifted their heads. Osric took one step toward her. Silence. Tessira did not stop. Blame is what someone else tied around the wound so he would never ask who held the knife. The black fragment cracked. Tharen's wolf shadow snarled, but not at Tessira. At the memory. At the old lie. The vault shuddered. Inside the crack, something silver moved. Osric lunged. Tharen intercepted him. Not with a killing blow. With one hand around his uncle's wrist, stopping the spear before it could strike Tessira. The effort nearly broke him. The black fragment still pulled at his wolf heart, whispering through the vault with Osric's old voice. You did it. You asked for this. You are safer empty. Tharen's eyes darkened. Tessira reached toward the cracked fragment. Tharen's grip tightened on Osric. Do not touch it. If I do not, it will close. It may hurt you. It already has. The words were not brave. They were simply true. She pressed her blood-marked palm against the black fragment. The vault exploded into the real memory. Tharen had not torn out his wolf heart. He had tried to hold it in. The storm chamber returned but clearer now. The armored men on the floor were not victims of Tharen's rage. They were Osric's men sent with moon iron hooks and soul knives after the king collapsed from grief. Tharen's wolf shadow had killed some protecting him, then fallen under black whistles and chain spells. Young Tharen had crawled toward his wolf bleeding. Osric had knelt beside him with tears in his eyes. Not false tears. That made it worse. I am saving you, Osric had whispered. Then he cut the first fragment from the wolf heart, while Tharen was still reaching for it. The memory shattered. The black casing split open. Inside it floated a pale fragment, dim and shaking. Memory, not blame. Tharen made a broken sound. Osric's face collapsed for one breath into something old and human. You would have died from that pain. Tharen looked at him. It was mine. The words broke the last false shape. The memory fragment flew toward his wolf shadow. This time it did not strike like a weapon. It entered gently, and that gentleness nearly brought Tharen to his knees. Mercy, fury, and memory beat together in the wolf's chest. The hollow was not full, but it was no longer empty enough to lie to. The black water recoiled. 3 deeper chains snapped in the pit. White ravens burst from the walls in a storm of wings circling Tharen Tessira and the fragments still below. Their cries were no longer panic. They were declaration. Osric staggered backward. You do not understand what I kept from him, he said. Tessira lowered her hand, shaking. No. Tharen released his uncle's wrist. Osric stumbled. Theron's voice came quiet. But I understand what you kept from me. The remaining fragments rose from the water one by one. Grief, loyalty, desire, and the dark red center of the wolf heart itself. The vault trembled under their weight. Tessira swayed. Returning 3 pieces had nearly broken the room. Returning the center might break the king. Osric saw it. His eyes flashed toward the bone whistles. The ravens moved to block him, but he did not reach for the whistles. He reached into his own chest and pulled out a small black shard hidden under his skin. The missing key. Tessira felt every raven in the vault recoil. Osric smiled through blood. You may recover what was stolen, he said, but you cannot return what I bound to my life. He crushed the shard in his fist. And somewhere inside Theron's recovering wolf heart, the center stopped beating. The silence after the stopped heartbeat was worse than a scream. Every raven in the vault froze, with its wings half open. The black water went still. The remaining fragments, grief, loyalty, desire, and the dark red center hung above the pit, like moons suddenly cut loose from the sky. Tharen Vant stood beneath them with 3 lights burning in his wolf shadow's chest, and for one terrible breath, all 3 dimmed. Mercy weakened. Fury cooled. Memory flickered like a candle starved of air. Osric Bracken opened his bloodied fist. The crushed black shard had melted into his palm. Thin veins of dark light crawled up his wrist, sinking under his skin, tying his pulse to the stopped center of Theron's wolf heart. You see, Osric said, voice rough with pain and triumph. I did not hide it in a box. I did not trust cages alone. The last lock lives in me. Theron's wolf shadow snarled. The sound filled the heart vault with enough force to shake feathers from the walls. The king moved toward his uncle slow and deadly, but Tessira Lark saw what Osric wanted before the first step landed. If Tharen killed him, the lock would die closed. If Tharen spared him, the heart would remain hostage. Osric had made himself both thief and coffin, Majesty Tessira said. Tharen stopped. Not because the word commanded him, because her voice had learned where to touch the part of him still choosing. Osric laughed softly. Listen to her. Let the kitchen girl teach you how to be robbed gently. The fury fragment in Theron's wolf shadow flared red. Tessira forced herself upright. Her knees trembled. Her wrist throbbed where the hook had held her. Blood had dried on her cheek, her dress, her palm. She looked breakable enough that any court would have dismissed her again, but the ravens did not. They watched her as if weakness had never made a soul less exact. She looked at Osric's bleeding hand. That is not the heart. His smile faded. It is the lock, she said. The white ravens rustled. A single pale feather drifted down and landed on the black water. Tessira's raven mark warmed. The ravens do not steal from living flesh, she whispered, understanding as she spoke. That is why you called them cursed. They would not tear the pieces out of you. They waited for keeper blood to show them the road without becoming thieves. Osric's face hardened. Pretty mercy. Useless mercy. No. Tharen said, his voice low. Mercy kept them cleaner than you. The words struck Osric. For the first time, he looked truly furious. I carried the key in my own body to protect you. You carried it so I could never be whole without your permission. Osric's jaw worked. You were not meant to be whole. Whole kings are vulnerable. Whole wolves love, grieve, hesitate, forgive. Rivals use that. Courts use that. Women use that. Servants with soft eyes use that. Tessira flinched before she could stop herself. Tharen saw. His face changed. Not into softness. Into decision. He turned away from Osric and faced the dark red center hovering above the pit. The stopped heartpiece did not beat. It looked almost dead now, but Tessira could feel the difference. It was not dead. It was waiting behind a locked door. Tharen removed his sword belt and let it fall. The sound startled. The guard's more than drawn steel would have. Osric stared. What are you doing? Not what you trained me to do. Tharen stepped to the edge of the pit and opened his hands. No weapon, no command, no demand. His wolf shadow stood behind him, chest lit by mercy, fury, and memory, each fragment shaking under the strain of the missing center. If the key is in you, Tharen said to Osric, keep it. The vault stirred. Osric's eyes narrowed. You cannot mean that. I do. The dark red center pulsed once, very faintly. Tessira understood, and almost stopped breathing. Tharen was not surrendering his heart. He was refusing the hostage. Osric had built his power on one belief, that every stolen piece could force the owner to bargain with the thief. But a heart did not return, because the thief released the lock. It returned when the living owner chose the pain of being whole over the safety of remaining controlled. Tharen looked at Tessira then, not asking her to save him, asking if the road existed. Her own fear answered first. She was a kitchen girl with shaking wrists, a keeper without training, a body that failed under pails and stairs and cold mornings. But the ravens had never needed her to be strong in the way the palace measured strength. They had needed her to know the difference between recovery and theft. She stepped beside him and placed her blood-marked palm over her own heart. Not on him, not on the fragment, on herself. The center does not belong to the lock, she said. It belongs to the living wolf that can bear it. The ravens opened their wings. Tharen's voice came rough. I choose it. Osric staggered as if struck. You do not know what it will bring back. No, Tharen said, but I know what your emptiness made of me. The stopped center beat once. The sound threw ripples across the black water. Tessira closed her eyes and named the road, not the bird, not the king, not herself. Return what was stolen to the one who chooses it awake. The heart vault answered. White ravens lifted from every wall, every broken chain, every rib-shaped cage. They did not fly at Osric. They flew around him, a storm of pale wings that touched nothing but the dark light crawling through his veins. Each wingbeat drew a thin black thread from his blood, without cutting skin, without tearing flesh, without becoming the monsters he had named them. Osric screamed, not from death, from losing possession. The black veins peeled away from him and spun into the air, weaving themselves into the shape of the crushed shard. The key reformed above his open palm, no longer black but silver-white. Then it broke into feathers. The dark red center of Tharen's wolf heart began to beat. Once. Twice. The whole vault bowed around the sound. The center flew into his wolf shadow. Tharen dropped to both knees. His wolf shadow arched over him, no longer hollow, no longer starved, no longer a weapon built around absence. Mercy, fury, memory, grief, loyalty, desire, and the center of the heart struck together in one terrible rhythm. The return did not make him gentle. It made him real. Grief hit first. Tharen bent forward as memories flooded him. The wounded wolf under his cloak, the soldiers he had mourned, the mother he had loved, the betrayals Osric had hidden behind protection, the years of victories that had felt empty because the part that knew joy had been locked away. Then rage, then tenderness, then desire not toward conquest, not toward possession, but toward the life he had been denied the ability to reach for. His hand struck the stone floor. Cracks spread outward, but he did not jaw. But he breathed. Once. Again. The ravens circled lower. Tessira stood near him, trembling with the effort of not falling. She wanted to touch his shoulder. She did not. He had just reclaimed a heart stolen through hands that called themselves help. She would not make her care another claim. At last, Tharen lifted his head. His eyes were wet and silver bright. Osric lay against the wall alive, shaking his palm empty. Without the shard under his skin, he looked older, smaller, not harmless, but finally human enough to be judged. I saved you, Osric whispered. Tharen rose slowly. You survived through me. The words were quiet. The vault heard them like a sentence. The guards lowered their spears. The white ravens settled across the cages, and the black chains holding the remaining trapped wolf soul pieces cracked apart. Fragments of other stolen royal beasts, small dim lights, hidden from old kings and dead heirs, rose from the water and hovered, waiting for names not yet spoken. Tessira looked at them. The work was not over. It would not end with one king healed. Tharen followed her gaze. Can they all be returned? Not by force, she said. Not all at once. A faint, broken smile touched his mouth. Then we begin correctly. He turned to Osric. Lord Osric Bracken will stand before the Raven Court at dawn. Every sealed order, every whistle, every hidden fragment, opened. Osric closed his eyes. Punishment would have been easier if it came as a blade. Truth would take longer. Above them, palace bells began to ring, not the alarm bells, but the old moon bells. No one had used since the dead wing was sealed. The sound traveled through the vault, through the stair, through the kitchen yard where servants still waited in shock. Tharen stepped toward Tessira, stopped, waited. That undid her more than any grand declaration could have. You were sent here as punishment, he said. What do you ask to leave as— Tessira looked down at her hands. Small hands, shaking hands. Hands that had dropped pails, saved a wounded raven, and opened the road to a king's stolen heart. She thought of the kitchen yard laughter. Weak girl, bone bird girl, useful only when punished. Then she looked at the ravens. At first she said, voice unsteady but clear, I ask to leave, without being sent. Tharen lowered his head. Not quite a bow. Enough for every guard in the vault to understand. Then no one sends you again. By dawn the dead wing gates stood open. The white ravens filled the broken arches, their feathers bright against the pale sky. The feeding slab had been washed clean of slaughter blood. On it burned 7 small silver-red lights, not fragments now, but witnesses of what had been restored. Tessira stood beside the slab, with the wounded raven perched on her shoulder. No collar, no kitchen pail, no order waiting in someone else's mouth. Tharen emerged from the palace into the yard, his wolf shadow walking behind him, whole-chested and immense. Not tame, not safe, alive. The servants stepped back. Tessira did not. The king stopped before her leaving enough distance for choice. The ravens will need a keeper, he said. Tessira looked at the flock, then at the open gate, then at the man whose heart had returned because he had chosen pain over control. I will keep the road, she said, not the cage. Tharen's wolf shadow lowered its great head to the raven on her shoulder. The raven touched its pale beak to the wolf's restored chest. A single heartbeat rolled through the yard. Every white raven lifted into the dawn. And this time, when the palace looked at Tessira Lark, no one saw a weak girl sent to feed cursed birds. They saw the keeper of what kings lost.